Housing has been front and center this summer as prices continue to soar.
There are solutions to the housing challenges facing this part of the country, facing every part of the country, but it's going to require that everybody work together.
Build, build, build. The homes that will put roof overhead for our working class people.
Canadian renters are feeling the squeeze of high monthly rates. The average cost of a one-bedroom home or place to live in Canada is more than $1,800, and that is up 21% over 2 years. Now, the most expensive cities in which to rent are Vancouver, where the average one-bedroom apartment tops $3,000 a month, Toronto and Burnaby, BC, where you're likely to pay around $2,500 a month. There may be a solution. A new report out today lays out 10 recommendations to ending Canada's rental housing crisis. Tim Richter is president and CEO of the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. He's in Calgary. Michael Brooks is head of RealPAC, a group that represents 130 real estate firms, and he's in Toronto today. And with me in studio in Ottawa, Mike Moffat, the founding director of the Place Centre at the Smart Prosperity Institute. Gentlemen, welcome to all of you. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Mike, let me begin with you. You've chosen in this report to focus on the rental housing crisis. How overall important is that segment, the rental market, to solving the overall situation?
Well, I think it's a massive issue. It's where we see some of the biggest affordability challenges with rents going up. But we should recognize that if we solve the rental crisis, we essentially solve all of the housing crisis. We're losing a lot of single-family homes to getting turned into student rentals and a lot of conversions like that. So having a rental system that works well helps the entire housing system.
And bearing in mind, you point out in your report, a third of Canadians are renters right now. So it is, as you say, a key part. Let me bring you in, Tim, on all of this. The three of you sat down to look at this issue. And it's interesting that you come from such varied perspectives. The economists, we have you, an advocate for the homeless. We have someone who's in big ticket real estate there, in Michael. You come at this from different backgrounds and perspectives, and that there you are coming to common solutions in this report. What does this suggest in terms of doability?
Well, it's really interesting when you sit down and you get all these different perspectives in a room. It's remarkable how quickly we came to agreement and how much common ground that we were able to find. And I think that's a really important lesson as we try to wrestle with how to solve the rental housing crisis is we got to get people in a room and have a conversation. There was way more that we agreed on than disagreed on, and the path forward became pretty clear pretty quickly.
So interesting. And you lay out in this report the 10 key recommendations. I mean, there's a lot more to read, but let's focus on some of the recommendations that you have landed on to achieve this goal of solving the rental crisis in this country. Number one, Michael, you call on the federal government to lead on this issue, to bring all parties to the table. How do you see the federal government's role in this?
Well, the federal government has some key policy levers. We know they have taxation, we know they have investment, we know they have finance with CMHC. But we'd rather have a top-down national strategy than a bunch of provincial or local strategies that comprise a patchwork. So we think the federal government has a key leadership role to play going forward, and that's why we choose to focus on the federal.
Okay, so Mike, when the Prime Minister says, as he did, that housing is not a primary federal responsibility, you want it to be.
Well, I think it should be everybody's responsibility, that this is not an City of Ottawa shortage, it's not an Ontario shortage, it's a Canada-wide shortage. So we need to have a Team Canada approach, and I think the federal government needs to captain this. But absolutely, we need to bring the provinces, municipalities to the table, along with industry, social advocates, the labor movement. Just get everybody in a room to figure out how to lead this. And
everybody in a room. Do you foresee a national housing summit or something of that nature?
I think we do need to have something of that nature, and it can be done. I think we've seen this group that we brought together that, as Tim pointed out, comes at it from a variety of different viewpoints, but we quickly discovered that we had far more in common. So I think we can absolutely get all of these groups together, we've got a blueprint here, and we can fill in those details and really address those crises.
Okay, we'll come back to the notion of blueprint in just a second. Some of the key recommendations looking at this, that the federal government, this is your second recommendation, the federal government should help create a national workforce, an immigration strategy on housing, including construction trades and other employment classes related to housing production. Tim, come to this idea of a national workforce. I guess it makes sense. You need people to build what you're talking about, the numbers required.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, one of the biggest challenges I hear from Michael and Mike is that we and I hear from our sector too, when we're trying to build affordable housing, is that we just don't have the workers we need to get it done. And that, you know, and I think there's a huge opportunity here to train a domestic workforce on building the next generation of housing, and tied into another one of our recommendations, thinking about innovation, about doing housing differently than we've done. We've been building them the same way for the last 50 years. I think there's a real opportunity here for increased productivity and a really strong national workforce to develop this housing.
The second part of that recommendation, Mike, to you, and immigration strategy on housing. To what degree do you see immigration policy and housing policy dovetailing?
Oh, I think they play a very important role, and I think we need to look at the system. So for the last 40 to 50 years, our immigration system has been focused on bringing in guys like me, you know, university professors, a lot of white-collar professionals. But my dad was a sheet metal worker. He did duct work in apartments back in the 60s and 70s. Our immigration system tends to not prefer guys like him. But we look, it's folks like my dad where we have the shortage. In fact, because folks like my dad are the ones retiring, and that's creating the need to replace those jobs.
Michael, Tim was just saying, build differently. The leverage component that we see in your recommendations, the recommendation to tie infrastructure to municipal housing targets. Can you explain how that would work and what difference that would make?
Yeah, we need to obviously have all three levels of government come together. The municipalities really are in charge of process and approvals, and that can be brutally slow in many cities in Canada. So in the city of Toronto, for example, which I'm familiar with, you know, it could be 3 years, 4 years, 5 years to go through the entire process of applying for a building permit to putting shovel in the ground. We can't wait that long. Some of our members invest in the US. You can go to Austin, Texas and get an apartment building built in 12 to 24 to 36 months. That's ridiculously fast. They welcome you with open arms. There's minimal bureaucracy. They don't like red tape there either. And the returns are good. That's what we're competing with.
So two parties have weighed in on this already, but they have different approaches. The Conservatives want punishment or withholding funds if projects aren't done quickly. The Liberals have this $4 billion housing accelerator fund to speed things up. Do you fall on which approach you prefer?
You know, this is about process, just like the three of us. It's about process before you get to outcome. And in Ontario, for example, the big city mayors, as you know, have been pushing back about the forced supply obligations in some cases from the provincial government, or saying, look, we don't have the planners, we don't have the throughput, we need to talk through this. So I would say get together with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, the big city mayors, others, to figure out what's the best way of moving this forward. Consultation is always the best way.
Okay. Tim, part of this as well, and Michael, feel free to jump in, but the suggestion, I was just talking about this with NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, this has been one of his party's policies, waiving the GST on rental housing construction in terms of an incentive there. How do you see it working?
Well, I think that's an important component. Someone said online today, you know, we don't charge GST or HST for groceries. Why would we charge it on rental housing when it's absolutely essential to us? And that's part of the math that goes into it. I don't think removing the HST and GST alone would be quite enough. But I think it would be a good start. And I want to get back to an earlier point just about bringing folks together. You know, Housing policy in Canada has been like the political equivalent of a high school dance. Like, we've had different levels of government all standing around the walls, staring at their feet, waiting for somebody else to go first. I mean, we have to get that conversation started, and it's going to be a combination of conditionality on funding or agreements between the provinces and territories, but we do it on healthcare, we do it on childcare, we have a model of cooperative federalism that you would think it would be possible for that negotiation to happen, but we've never tried. And I think what a big part of what we're calling for is to let's get everybody in a room and sort this out.
Heather, let me jump in on the GST issue.
And then I'll come to Mike.
So this was in then Finance Minister Morneau's mandate letter to remove it. It never happened. And you may know that fees, charges, taxes on a new house or a new residential accommodation, a new apartment, is north of 30% in many parts of Canada. It's like taxing cigarettes. It's a sin tax on housing. So removing the HST on completion of purpose-built rental would be a start to remove that huge burden of taxes on housing.
It's a rich and deep report. I mean, there are questions looking at the CMHC and its role, low-income renters and support for them. There's much to glean from looking at this. A starting point, you use the word blueprint, Mike Moffat. You'll get the concluding word here. What do you hope government does with what you have laid out for us here today?
Well, I hope they start to fill in the details. And one of the things we focus in on the report is we've been through these challenges before, that after World War II, we had all the returning veterans come in, and we had federal policy to address that. Back in the 1960s, we had like today, we had a surge of immigration. We had a lot of young people looking for apartments. We used a lot of tools to get buildings built then. And a lot of those recommendations, a lot of those things we did in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s are in this report. So we're saying, let's dust those off. Let's make them applicable to 2023. We've done them before. They worked in the past. We could make them work again.
Mike here in Ottawa. Thank you. Michael in Toronto, Tim in Calgary. I appreciate all three of you so much. And thank you for this most interesting and important reading. Thanks.